Rakefet is a PhD student in the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and she's currently a research fellow at the Franz Rosenzweig Minerva Center for German Jewish History and Culture in Jerusalem. Her PhD investigates the role of adult education in building the nation in Israel from the 1930s to the 1950s. This research deals with questions of entangled history and the ways in which educational knowledge is transferred and applied. The PhD is supervised by Professor Ifat Weiss and Professor Dan Poat. Alongside this, Rakefet works as a teacher and educator at the Hartman High School for Girls in Jerusalem. And this morning she will speak on women in adult education, Martin Buber and Nechama Leibowitz.
And how I go from one to one? With okay, so thank you, and I will start. No. Okay. During the year 1951, the staff of the Hebrew University was invited to observe classes at the Bet Midrash for educators. In a note attached to the invitation, it was stated, if you want to see a class conducted in the spirit of Buber, come to a class of Nechama. As you can see in the list of lecturers of the Bet Midrash, only 2 female teachers taught there, Nechama Leibowitz and Yonina Garber-Talmon. I believe that Buber himself brought both of them to the Bet Midrash, and perhaps this is the underlying concept of this conference, according to which Buber believed in bringing women into influential circles. This is in direct contrast to the almost complete absence of women in the field of adult education in Israel during those years, as my research shows. Yonina Garber-Talmon wrote her doctoral thesis under the guidance of Buber and later taught in the Department of Sociology at the Hebrew University. But in today's talk, I want to focus on Nechama Leibowitz, who always asked to be called simply Nechama. Nechama was born in 1905 in Riga, the younger sister of famous Yeshayahu Leibowitz. In 1919, the family immigrated to Berlin, where she studied at the gymnasium. In 1929, Nechama received a doctorate in linguistics and literature from the University of Marburg, and in 1930, she received a high school teaching certificate. After her marriage to her uncle, Nechama immigrated to Palestine, Israel, and began to teach in a variety of settings. From that time and for many, many decades following, Nechama taught Bible using the method of questions and answers. The existing research on her method of studying the Bible has already demonstrated the use Nechama made of Buber and Rosenzweig's translation of the Bible. More recently, Dana Rubinstein and Inon Vigoda have demonstrated that Nechama also assisted Buber with translation in the 60s. Today, I would like to focus on the act of teaching itself of both Buber and Nechama. Both were involved in adult education for many years, an educational field that's scarcely been explored in Israel. My research offers a new look at the relationship between Buber and Nechama and the teaching methods for adult education that they both brought from Germany in the spirit of the new direction, Neue Richtung. In 1949, the Center for the Education of the People next to the Hebrew University was established. The center grew out of the Committee for the Education of the People established in 1940. It was supposed to be a central institution for adult education, but in the early years, most of its efforts and funds were devoted to the Bet Midrash for educators under the guidance of Martin Buber. 70-year-old Buber was the director of the Bet Midrash, and Dr. Gideon Freudenberg was the pedagogical director of the center. In order to train teachers to educate older immigrants, they decided to cultivate an affinity for Jewish tradition in addition to acquainting them with Israeli society and culture. The course lasted 10 months and included dozens of hours of intensive learning, varied evening activities which included listening to classical music and discussion sessions, as well as practical training with focus on new immigrants. At the end of the course, the students received certificates that qualified them to teach adults, and many of them did apply for work in this field. Consistent with Buber's vision, the Bet Midrash operated in a boarding school setting. The teaching staff was evaluated to be certain that each one would be suitable for the spirit of the particular institution and would be capable of an intensive dialogical approach, different from regular academic teaching. The first 3 sessions of the Bet Midrash were successful, but during the first session, there was no longer adequate financial support, and the Bet Midrash closed, and the Center for the Education of the People returned to its other tasks. As mentioned, Buber's philosophy of adult education was influenced by an approach called the New Direction, Neue Richtung, which emerged in Germany after the First World War. It challenged the old conceptions of adult education and sharply criticized the old direction, Alte Richtung. The Israeli research did not focus on these connections and the impact on Buber's activities in the field of adult education. So I will briefly present the new direction, Neue Richtung, and then point out Buber's connection with it. The institutionalized beginnings of the old direction originated with the unification of Germany and the establishment of the German Empire at the end of the 19th century. Adult education was an essential component in the process of unifying Germany and turning it into a nation state. At the center of the activity was the individual lecture, as you can see here. Individual lecture through which knowledge was transferred from the knowledgeable lecturer to the uneducated classes. Hermann Herigel, a famous journalist and one of the persons of the New Direction, suggested a critical and pictorial description of this method and described the lone lecturer like a Bäuerin. Je mehr, desto besser. Selber steht mit dem Bildungsstoff in der Mitte und verteilt seinem Karl May Goethe und so weiter. Okay. At the end of the 20th century, changes gradually developed in adult education in Germany, changes that gave rise to the new direction, Neue Richtung, with the founding of the Weimar Republic. At that time, adult education was viewed as playing a key role in building the new German democratic nation and as a tool for shaping the new culture. As part of this change, an extensive establishment of the Volkshochschule began, in which the emphasis was not on lectures, but on free conversation in small groups and on the Arbeitsgemeinschaft, in which each participant was an active participant in learning. The conceptual basis of the new direction was the Danish model developed by Nikolai Grundtvig in 19th century Denmark. According to Grundtvig, special boarding schools should be set up for intensive adult education. The curriculum included reading Christian and Danish literature, though by way of free and genuine discussion between teachers and their students. In this spirit, after the First World War, dozens of Volkshochschule institutions opened all over Germany. The Volkshochschule movement included evening schools in addition to schools that operated as boarding schools for adult education. And despite the differences between the various models, the nature of the new adult education gradually developed. Emphasis one on intensive and creative education in small groups, through which learning from discussion took place. As you can read here, in Better für die Volkshochschule Thüringen, Dr. Flinter war wohl dabei, da stand einer in blauer Joppe und Kniehosen am Baum gelegt und fing zu erzählen an. You can see the difference from the first emphasis. The facilitator was perceived as a guide and not as a source of knowledge, and the whole system was perceived as a symbol for the democracy that participants learned. Buber himself was in Jena, in Volkshochschule Jena, and in the meetings of the people who organized the new direction in Hohenrodet-Bund. And back to the state of Israel, in 1949, I believe that the Bet Midrash for Educators was an Israeli Volkshochschule. It was an attempt by Buber to adapt the ideas of the new direction from Germany to the reality of Palestine, an experience that he aspired to implement through his years in Germany and after his immigration to Israel. After years of activity in Germany, Buber immigrated to Israel in 1938 as the Nazis rose to power. Then he was appointed as the head of the Department of Cultural Sociology at the Hebrew University. He also gave lectures to the general public, like the Alte Richtung, an activity that was at the center of the university adult education program during the 1940s. However, Buber contended that lectures to the general public did not serve the real need for adult education, and he never stopped dreaming and working for the establishment of an adult educational institution. In fact, my research makes it possible to present the sequence of Buber's activities in the field of adult education and fill in the gaps of information about what he did in the 40s, and create a connection between his activities in Germany and the Bet Midrash for Educator established only at the end of the decade. For example, as you can see here, in September 1945, Buber wrote a letter to Hebrew University Administrator David Werner Senator, in which he proposed that comprehensive center for adult education be built on Mount Scoops. The original letter, in Buber's handwriting, is kept in the university archives. An undated copy of the letter was printed in Briefwechsel, but with an incorrect date, 1947. The correct date shows that Buber did not give up the idea, even if he was not able to realize it, until 1949. In the letter of reply to Buber, which I also found in the archive, Senator expressed sympathy for the idea, but saw no practical way to promote it, and the implementation of the idea had to wait until the right time. And despite those repeated efforts to advance the ideas of adult education, Buber attempts to implement them at the time were unsuccessful for many years. Finally, in 1948, Buber did have an opportunity to fulfill his dream, the establishment of internal institution for intensive adult education in the form of Bet Midrash for Educators. The Bet Midrash addressed two urgent national needs: training teachers to teach older immigrants, so many of them came in these years, and a channel of activity for the Hebrew University, which was forced to transfer his focus from Mount Scoops to other campuses in the city. In addition to these goals, it was the first time that Buber could finally, under special circumstances, fulfill the dream of education adults in Israel in the way that he had envisioned over the years. In a complex process led by Buber and Avraham Alevi Frenkel, you can see next to him, the Bet Midrash for educators was established. It was a boarding school, like Volkshochschule, where intensive study took place in discussion groups, Arbeitsgemeinschaft, and working groups. Learners were exposed to an in-depth clarification of basic questions and concepts, all in the spirit of the new direction and the Volkshochschule movement that Buber brought with him from Germany. In a similar way, Nechama's teaching, you can see here a picture from Buber's birthday, and it was a surprise to me to see Nechama in this picture. You can see Mazar and Dinur and Buber, of course, and maybe Gershom Shalom, and also only one female, Nechama. Nechama teaching methods was based on asking questions and conversation that was both free and directed. Her ideological closeness to Buber's teaching method and to the ideas of the new direction led her to join the teaching staff at the Bet Midrash. This may also have been facilitated by her acquaintance with Professor Avraham Halevi Frenkel, who was the director of the University Adult Education Center. Frenkel, an important mathematician, founded the Center for Adult Education in 1940s and ran it for more than 20 years. During the 20s, Frenkel was a lecturer at the University of Marburg and hosted Jewish religious students studying in the city for Shabbat meals. Nechama was one of his guests and kept in touch with him later on as well. Frenkel's attitude towards women was much more conservative, and he recently was even mentioned as the one who prevented the promotion of Pepita HaEzrachi. In my opinion, Buber actually strove to promote women, and he was the one who brought women teachers, Nechama and Yonina Garber Talmon, to the Bet Midrash. In 1942, Nechama Leibowitz began mailing out stencils of questions on the weekly Torah reading to anyone who requested them. These worksheets, which she called Gilionot, pages, would be sent back to her, and she would personally review all of them and return with them with corrections and comments. They became very popular and were in great demand by people from all sectors of Israeli society. This is from my parents' private archive, and you can see my mother wrote, and she wrote her excellent. And this is a letter to my father. Okay, so this is my mother and my father answers, and Nechama responds to what they wrote, and it's amazing. She do it for years for anyone who sent her answers, and it was adult education in a way of asking questions and response and free conversation, but directed. It's amazing. In 1954, Nechama applied to the Katz Foundation for a grant in research in adult education. It was a special foundation for adult education in the Hebrew University. In the application, she describes her work and states that 200 people send her the answers to the sheets every week. She requested the grant to focus on teaching methods in adult education in order to learn from the vast experience in this field acquired in other countries throughout the world. It appears that just as Buber and Nechama were familiar with the new direction approach that emerged in Germany in the beginning of the century, so in the middle of the century, Nechama sought to learn from other countries as well. And finally, in the Bet Midrash, there were not only female teachers, but also quite a few female students. One of them, Dina Vinkov, in 2007 told about her experiences at the Bet Midrash. Vinkov describes the impressive meeting with Buber at the admission interview, but notes that she hardly studied with him. The first teacher she mentions in the list of teachers is Nechama Leibowitz, as you can see in the middle, who left a huge impression on her. The unique teaching method which encouraged adults to think for themselves, look for the answers, and explore reality, conducted Buber with Nechama Leibowitz. In addition to looking at Buber ideas, which have been extensively researched, I propose to examine the teaching methods and their effect on women and men. Nechama's use of the German translation of Buber and Rosenzweig influenced the general public in Israel, which became familiar with this translation, and I argue that her teaching methods also reflected the teaching methods that Buber brought with him from Germany.